Welcome. Do we have this broadcast going? I believe we do. Hello, everyone. I'm Tommy Mitchell with CPI International. I'm here with Daryl Johnson today, and we're going to give people a few minutes to join here. So, I just want to give you guys an idea of what we have going on with this Webinar Ninja platform. Up in the upper right corner, you can see there's a chat box. If you want to let us know where you're coming from, please do type in there. I'm coming from Torrey, Utah, actually, which is an interesting place with a lot of red rock. I think Daryl's in Las Vegas, Nevada, and we have our host Alyssa Morse at our office in Santa Rosa, California. He'll be guiding us through this process. Just want to welcome everybody. If you'll also see next to the chat, you can drop in some questions. Please do. We want to know what kind of questions you guys have. And at the end, we're going to have a chance to go through some of these. And if we don't get to all the questions, we'll also get back to you in email or by phone. So please do, if you have thoughts or questions, that'll be helpful. I think you can make those public questions, and I think you can also potentially just ask us those if it's a question you don't want everybody else to be seeing for some reason. We also did create some polls. We want to make this somewhat interactive. So next to the question up in the upper right tab there, you'll see a polling section. And I'm not sure if you can see all the polls we have out there, but at some point you'll be able to take a poll. That'll be helpful for us, both in understanding what's on people's minds, to guide the discussion, but also, in our process afterwards for potential other webinars with DJ in this space. And with that said, let me get into it. CPI International is a laboratory supplier in the analytical space. We've been around about 40 years. Primarily, we were in the environmental lab space and grew from there. Over the last 5 or 10 years, we've really started working with a lot of cannabis labs, and within this space, there's a lot of growth, a lot of change, a lot of people validating methods, a lot of people looking for advice. So we thought this was a perfect opportunity to come together and provide you guys a resource and some information that might be helpful for you guys. So I'm here with Dr. Daryl Johnson. Daryl's got a great background within the cannabis space. He's an analytical chemist. He's been the scientific director of a cannabis lab. He's helped set up a cannabis lab as a laboratory director, and he's been traveling all throughout the country helping labs out over the last several years to develop methods. So again, we want this to be interactive. Please post your questions. Please post your comments. And we'll go from there. I'll turn it over to you, DJ, and let you give a little bit more detail about yourself and get into it.
Perfect. I appreciate it, Tommy. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about considerations for cannabis reference standards. Slide, please. So a little bit about my background. I've been in the cannabis space since 2016. Prior to that, I was actually a postdoc at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia. I was there from 2013 to 2016. While I really enjoyed my time there, my passion was really cannabis. I wanted to get into the cannabis space, and unfortunately, kind of the politics of the state of Georgia, I knew that wasn't going to happen. So we had to hit the road to go somewhere else for me to be able to study cannabis scientifically. So as Tommy mentioned, I was the director of a cannabis safety and potency testing lab here in Las Vegas for 5 years, from 2016 to 2020. During my time there, I really got to see a change in the industry. We went from 0 application notes and nobody wanted to sell us products to now you've got all kinds of application notes from instrument manufacturers and other resources. So I've really gotten to experience a lot of that change. Following at the end of 2020, I got the opportunity to study actual aerosol testing. So actually smoking the devices and studying what we're actually consuming. So I worked at a lab for about a year out in Berkeley, setting up methods and working on that. But really my passion was working with different customers, helping to set up labs and helping to build. So I actually launched a consulting company back in 2019 and decided to go full-time in 2020. So I've gotten the opportunity now to work in about 12 different states. It's really interesting to see the differences between states. And that's one of the challenges, is that every state is its own market. If you take a look here too, I just wanted to put a little picture in here. It's cool that I've gotten to see so much in the industry. This is actually a picture of me there in the background, sampling plants in a mother room, doing pesticide testing at all levels. So mother plants, vegetative, through flower, and into the final product. So I've just really enjoyed the opportunity to go. I've probably gotten to go through about 50 cultivations and production facilities at this time. And it's really cool just to see what everybody's doing, how they're setting it up. And, at the end of the day, I think a lot of us are doing very similar stuff and want to produce good products. Laboratory aspect is just part of that. So, part of my talk today, I wanted to really focus on the laboratory testing and how we continue to improve that. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our background. I actually met Tommy back in 2022 at a conference, and really enjoyed getting my time to get to know him. And I think we had a lot of very common interest and common philosophies. So as he mentioned, CPI is a reference material provider, both now in the cannabis space and the environmental space. And I think really what kind of drew us together was we had very similar philosophies and goals. We both have a very good understanding that certified reference materials are a critical aspect of your laboratory operation. Bad materials, bad data, it's going to be very difficult to operate. But we both felt like there are lots of challenges in the cannabis industry, but challenges present opportunities. So, we really looked at our partnership as, how do we continue to improve products on the market? And how do we make offerings that make, your life as laboratory analysts, directors, owners, wherever you may be in the laboratory space, how do we make your data better? How do we make your life a little easier? So just to kind of touch on a couple of the goals of the webinar today. I wanted to introduce some of the challenges associated with cannabis analysis. Make no mistake about it, if you are working in cannabis testing, it's difficult. You've got a lot of challenges. You've got challenges that some other industries don't have, and you've got some unique challenges because we're analyzing a plant that seems to have quite a bit of diversity. We also wanted to talk a little bit about your storage and use of your certified reference materials. I think that's a big part in how you're going to operate your lab and what's going to impact your day-to-day. We also wanted to talk a little bit about considerations for assessing your CRM stability. And if you take a look over at the graphic on the right-hand side, I've got a standard operating procedure, and I've got some different conditions on, various stages of our certified reference materials. Well, where did all that information come from? Some of that was on going from manufacturer recommendations, but a lot of that is really going to be to study what your standards are doing in your lab conditions, and, how you may need to run assays, or how you may need to reorder your certified reference materials. And of course, we wanted to introduce CPI products and solutions. I think there's a lot of great stuff that we're doing that I wanted to introduce and make sure that the audience knows, what products are available and what potential solutions. Now, before we go any further, I just wanted to make a disclaimer. I'm going to talk a lot about, some various aspects of things that you probably want to consider. However, this wasn't meant to be a talk to give you ISO advice or provide information for, your ISO scope. This is not meant to be your ISO prep. This is merely meant to spark discussions, hopefully give you some good ideas that you can take back to your lab and start to practice. All right, so challenges of the industry. I had to limit this to one slide, but I think I could talk for probably the entire time on challenges of the industry. First off, the biggest challenge is what we do is legal at the state level, but it's still not recognized at the federal level. And I can't really think of another lab challenge greater than that, or another industry that deals with something like that. At the end of the day, we're measuring volatile and reactive analytes. That is challenging. We're also measuring samples with high heterogeneity. We are still trying to figure out all the different compounds that are produced by the cannabis plant, and how much, variation that we're actually seeing in the end products. Likewise, let's face it, a lot of the sampling that we do is not nearly as representative as we would like to be. For instance, where I worked in Nevada, lots were 5 pounds. We took 1 10-gram sample for every 5 pounds. That's not really all that representative, but unfortunately, I think some of it's the economics of the industry. I'd love to sample 25 grams of cannabis, but, you're looking at $200-$300, a price for an ounce versus, 25 grams, 28 grams, somewhere in that range of strawberries is certainly not nearly as expensive as cannabis. Likewise, you've got the legal issues. At the end of the day, I still can't ship products across state lines. So I would love to produce a flower that was 20% THC with, these characteristics in there. But bottom line is we're just not allowed to do something like that. And I think that also leads to there's really a lack of matrix match QC materials. Just unfortunately, it's still, legality is kind of dictating that. And I would say one of the biggest ones is lack of collaborations. Unfortunately, this industry, your neighbor is your competitor, and you can't ship things across state lines. So it's often hard for us as scientists. We're used to chatting about problems. We're used to trying to reproduce each other's work. And unfortunately, this industry, it's just, the business side of it doesn't allow that. And then you also have a lack of harmony between state regulations. Every state is its own market. So, from an analytical perspective, that's challenging because you may be doing, different analytes than somebody else in the state next to you. And likewise, as reference material providers, that means that we've got to have multiple products. It's not a one size fits all for, all of the laboratories. So that's challenging. And different tolerance limits for things. I pulled from our friends Agilent. They did a good job with their application note of kind of showing, what those limits are. And I think it really just, further highlights that point of this is difficult because different states require different things, and that may impact your analysis, how you're storing reference materials, a lot of different things with that. So, as I mentioned, this industry, it's difficult. So, hopefully we're going to present some things that will make your life a little bit easier. As far as that, and while we can't fix all the challenges, we can certainly help out with some. All right. So, one of the things I think that often gets overlooked is at the end of the day, the laboratory is responsible for your own stability assessment. Your certified reference material provider is going to, they're responsible for assuring stability of their product, their packaging, their storage conditions. But once that product arrives on site and you open it up, that stability is now your responsibility. ISO 17025, the standard actually only mentions the word stability twice. If you go into guide 35, it's going to be a little more specific, but it's not going to tell you, I'd like to see these calibration levels, study this stability, X-Men, or this number of replicates. It's not going to give you those details. That's kind of your responsibility to figure out how you're going to prove that. And kind of our example here, this is, what I've dealt with and what I expect. You're going to have some analytes that are going to be very stable, that are not going to be problematic. And you're going to have others that are really going to dictate how you store things and how you actually run your assay day to day. So what issues will you observe? All right. Analytes can be impacted by a lot of different things, temperature being a big one, air, oxygen, light, storage solvent, and other analytes. And I kind of picked a couple that I would say are the things that would keep me up at night as I was running a lab, or the analytes that I would say if my analyst comes to me and says, I had a QC fail, I would say, I would bet, more oftentimes than not, these were kind of the repeat offenders, so to speak. So if any of you guys have Captan in your lab that you're required, I'm sure that you guys have run into, it is not very stable in solution. It makes it very challenging to analyze. Likewise, THCA, we're going to get into this a little bit more, but this is certainly a very reactive compound. And if, somebody said, I am failing a specific analyte on potency analysis, my money is going to be on THCA. Likewise, propane. I think propane is one of the most challenging analytes that you guys are going to look at. It's got such a low, it's so volatile, such a low boiling point. It is, I think, one of the most challenging analytes in the lab, in the entire suite of analysis. And likewise, ochratoxin A. Unfortunately, all the mycotoxins are very, very stable except for ochratoxin A. I've dealt with issues with that. So, I would say, these guys are some of the more difficult analytes, which also brings us to a poll question. We want a little bit of feedback on, what do you guys find as the most challenging assay? What set of analytes, present the biggest challenges to you so that we can start to think about what are the focuses or what are the things that we should be working on in the future to help make, help make that process a little easier.
And just as a note, you guys, I don't know if you know where the poll section is. If you joined us after the introduction, up in the upper right-hand side, you'll see a spot where you can actually add comments to the chat field. There's also an area where you can ask questions, and again, we'll answer questions at the end. And also, if we don't get to all the questions, we can email you or follow up with you guys by phone. And then next to there's a poll section. So if you go ahead and And I think there's two polls available now. One is, how do you have a calibration schedule? That one might be for later on. And what is your most challenging assay? So go ahead and start voting in there, and we can kind of get a context of where people are needing some help here. All right, back to you, DJ.
Perfect. Next slide, please. All right, so why should you study your reference materials? Well, several different reasons. The stability of your standards is going to impact ultimately your assay results. Let's not forget, at the end of the day, what is a calibration? A calibration is you are putting a set volume, concentration, amount of sample into an instrument. You're measuring that instrument response. Bad standards are going to lead to bad calibrations, which ultimately lead to irrelevant or inaccurate data. Likewise, how you store your reference materials. Some things like heavy metals, we don't have to have a lot of storage considerations. They're very stable. Other things like pesticides are meant to be reactive. They're going to be more challenging. It might also impact how you use your reference standards. Are you able to use multiple aliquots of something, or do you have to single use these? It's also likely going to affect your QC rules. Ultimately, when you're going to accept data or when you feel like there's a problem with the assay. In reruns, at the end of the day, if you're rerunning things due to QC fails, that can be incredibly costly, both from the financial impact. It costs you employee time, it costs you instrument time, it costs you supplies. But likewise, there's also the customer impact. I would say the expectations for customers in this industry are very difficult. And unfortunately, if you're not able to report things on time, it's a matter of time before they find somebody else who will. So, it's important that we try to, get in that position that you're not dealing with QC fails or assays and materials that are not that robust. If you take a look at the example QC chart from there, really, when things are within, your specifications, life is good. But once things start to drift out, that's really where, challenges can arise, and you may have to do things differently or really go back to the drawing board on the evaluation of your stability. All right, so before we move any further, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page for terms. You're going to hear me use things, a few different terms out of there, but ultimately at the end of the day, what we're looking at is how you use your certified reference materials. Are you using that to create your calibration standards? Are you using that to create a continuing calibration verification, CCV? You're proving that your calibration is still valid. Are you using it as initial calibration verification? Or likewise, I'm going to be referring to it as anything that you're using maybe for a QC material. You're spiking into a matrix and processing and analyzing. All of those things are going to be, from certified reference materials. So when I'm talking about each one of these, it really ultimately is a certified reference material that you're using to make these types of standards. All right, so CRMs used for calibration. At the end of the day, like I mentioned a little bit ago, calibration, all you're doing in a calibration is you are telling the instrument what you are doing and you're measuring a response. Beer's law of plot is going to say that response, likely, if your detector is linear, we can go across a range. And if your values are within that linear range, we're able to calculate unknowns from there. So unfortunately, the phrase junk in, garbage in, garbage out really applies here. If you've got bad standards, you're going to have bad calibrations. But a few other technical questions that arise out of that. Do you have a calibration schedule? How frequently are you calibrating? Does a specific event trigger a new calibration, or do you have some sort of schedule where you're planning, downtime, maintenance, and things like that? When you're calibrating, do you open up a new vial for each calibration, or do you use previously open vials? If you're going back to your stock standards that have previously been opened, how long is that standard valid for? How many times can you reuse it? All of those questions are things that you probably need to consider as you're developing your assay and the logistics of how you're going to run it day to day. And likewise, from our perspective, do you reorder CRMs after calibration, or do you wait until it's needed? If you wait until it's needed, do you have lead time concerns? We're going to get into this a little bit further, but I would say pre and post COVID is a different world for a lot of different reasons, and certainly supply chain issues, what you can and can't receive, has certainly been impacted by COVID and hasn't quite rebounded to where it was, back in 2019 and earlier. This also brings us to another poll question that we just wanted some feedback from our audience. Do you guys have a calibration schedule? Are you thinking in that term? Or are we being proactive, or are we being reactive with our calibrations and frequency of said calibrations? All right, so let's talk a little bit about kind of what I would consider storage and use stability considerations. It's not out of the question to say that things are going to be impacted by stuff that you are going to do. And a couple of questions that come to mind for me, how many times can you reuse that stock standard from the refrigerator or freezer? Have you considered freestyle stability? When I was a postdoc at the CDC, we spent a lot of time with our materials trying to better understand what was going to happen with them and how we ultimately ended up packaging things. So, that's an important consideration. Some things are going to handle freestyle stability well. Other analytes we're going to measure do not handle that all that well. It's also important to look at in-use stability. I'm thinking things like benchtop stability or on-instrument stability. It is not out of the question to say at some point an analyst may forget that they go to thaw out QC material, they leave it on the bench all day and they forget about it. Well, after 8 hours at room temperature, is that standard still valid? It's likely a question that you may encounter. Likewise, those stability concerns are going to impact your sample extracts. When to re-prepare a sample. Let's say you analyze a sample on Friday, something looks odd, or you want to rerun that. On Monday, do you need to re-prepare that sample, or are you good to reanalyze that extract that you prepared? Stability data may play a real significant role in how you store, how you aliquot, and how you reorder your CRMs. Another consideration along those same lines is, are your storage conditions appropriate? Things like acidic cannabinoids require very cold storage. I did a quick literature search and saw that, various products available, THCA is listed as anywhere from storage conditions of -18 to -80 Celsius. I'll be honest, I go through a lot of labs and most labs only have -20. So not sure if people were aware of that, but some of your stability issues with THCA just may be in the storage of what's recommended. I pulled our COA for our certified reference material over there and noticed that we recommend that you store this at -80 C, and it is because THCA and other acidics want to react in solution. Also, your environmental conditions are going to impact this. Lab temperature. I think a lot of labs get designed and we forget just how much heat. Things like nitrogen generators, things like GCs, ICP, things like that, they produce a lot of heat. So you may be dealing with elevated temperatures. You may have a hard time controlling the temperature or keeping it where you want to. Humidity also may play a factor in this. I live in the desert. My humidity is 10 to 20%. That's far different than some labs that I've worked with in other states where your humidity may be 50 or 60%. That may impact how your standards are changing over time. And likewise, storage solvent. This was a lesson that we got to learn the first year, kind of the hard way, watching things crash out in solution. It really highlighted the need to, better study this and better understand what we're doing. So along those same lines, solvents can have a huge impact on the stability of your analytes. Acidic cannabinoids are very reactive in methanol. Methanol is a great extraction solvent. However, it is not great for stability. Unfortunately, you can no longer buy acidic cannabinoids in methanol. And the reason is they crash out in solution. So, I think this was probably one of the biggest, lessons learned in year one is, wow, THCA really doesn't have much stability in methanol long term. Likewise, a lot of you guys may be doing extracts in methanol. So, heed that warning that you may see some interesting behavior. Notice with our standard over on the right, we actually package our acidics in acetonitrile for that reason. Likewise, another thing that comes up, pesticides. Pesticides are stored in high organic. However, some of the chromatography requires dilution in water steps. However, I don't advise that you do that too early in the process because, again, these things are going to be reactive. And if you're going to do that, you need to understand what's going to happen to your analytes over time. Another thing that also must be considered, and just a piece of advice from various groups that I've gotten the opportunity to work with. I see a lot of people when they write their SOPs, they're putting specificity and part numbers and things like that. And while that's great, I love that specificity. I would advise you to allow flexibility in this same regard. I love the phrase "or equivalent" out of there. Now, of course, it's on the laboratory to approve that the product is equivalent, but give yourself options. You never know when you're in a pinch in the 11th hour and you need something and it's not available. As we mentioned, pre and post-COVID supply chains are different. Allow yourself that flexibility. Don't lock yourself into a specific part number because that, you can't guarantee that part number is always going to be available for you. So hopefully we've presented some interesting challenges and problems that you guys are seeing. Hopefully that's creating a little insight on things that you may need to look at or things that you may have encountered that you need to better study. So I'd like to kind of switch gears now. Let's talk a little bit about CPI and some of the solutions that we have to acquire certified reference materials. As we mentioned, scheduled calibrations. Scheduled calibrations are great for a lot of reasons, but it also gives us the option for things like auto ship. Can we save you time for reorders? Unfortunately, somebody has to make the phone call, log onto the internet, and do all those. Time is money. That's your employee's time. So can we take some of that out of your hands? Likewise, we try to provide on-shelf inventory. CPI can stock, frequently ordered items to allow you the opportunity to call us to say, hey, I'm in a pinch. Can you overnight this? Can you get it here? That's ultimately going to lead to reduce lead time out of there. Nothing's worse than I need a standard and I can't get it. It also allows for things like planned reordering points. Are you using something frequently enough where we can help you set up a schedule that we've got a month's supply on site so that when you need to call us up, you can certainly do that. And hopefully that also helps with the cash flow management. Also, another thing I wanted to point out is we do have late shipping for supplies. We're on the West Coast, which allows us to do some things that manufacturers on the East Coast are not able to do. Specifically, we are able to ship up to 4 p.m. Pacific time. So hopefully that is something that helps make life a little easier. I know I've been in those positions a few times where you're making a phone call at the 11th hour, hoping that you can find something. Give us a call. We can certainly help accommodate that. And also we offer custom products and state-specific products. That's really what we wanted to focus on was, making things that are going to be useful for your lab. And as you guys saw, all labs are going to be different. From there, their state requirements are going to be different and what they may need might be different. So how do we, get you guys supplies that you need? And it's, unfortunately, it's not a one-size-fits-all type situation.
And
And along those same lines,
DJ, I'll just comment on some of that as well, just being from the supply side. So, it's really easy for CPI, if we're in discussions and actively working with somebody, if you guys want to request that something's on our shelf, we're happy to do it. So it's more about the dialogue back and forth. We sell a lot of custom products and things like that, and we're happy to put those on our shelves, but we generally don't do it unless we have a discussion that is this something you're going to be purchasing ongoing? And if you are, we're happy to put it on our shelf. And we've seen a lot of customers really take advantage of that because it can be really helpful. So you don't have to stock 3 months of inventory or 6 months of inventory. We'll stock that for you. We just need some assurances that, this is what you need and you're going to keep ordering it. So I think that's a really good point. And it really helps with the uncertainty of, oh no, I ran out of standard. I wasn't prepared, or some standard went bad and you need a new supply. Having that little planning aspect and communication aspect can be really helpful for us. And then on the auto ship piece, a lot of people do take advantage of that as well because it's nice just to have things show up. And lots of times you're on a routine schedule. So why call every time and order something when you can just have it shipped? So on those points, we're really flexible. We really can go down to the detail level that you guys need and for your lab. And so even if you have a custom solution you're looking for, we're happy to put that on the shelf for you to make sure that you don't stock out. Now, we don't generally do that unless there's some type of communication back and forth. So always feel free to reach out to us, our customer service or sales folks, and tell them your requirements, and we'll be happy to meet that and make sure you're not getting in a pinch. But again, communication back and forth is key, and we always are available by chat on our website, by phone, by email. Just wanted to throw that in there, DJ. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, glad you mentioned that. And one other thing along those same lines, I think we've all been in a pinch. I've had times where I've had to meet the UPS driver somewhere along their route. I think kind of a rite of passage for a cannabis lab is to get a Saturday delivery of something. It's not out of the question to say late Friday, something might go wrong. You may need something. And, we have the ability for that. I had a customer actually 2 weeks ago on a Friday afternoon. We realized they didn't have any standards and I was going to go on site to help them, set up one of their analysis. I was able to make a couple of phone calls, get to what I needed to, and we were able to get the customer next day, Saturday shipping. Standards arrived and I was able to help set them up. So, again, I will say planning is key. But this is a hurry up and wait. This is a hair on fire type industry. And it's not out of the question to say you may need a Saturday delivery. You may need something like that. So, we're here for you to help out with those types of situations. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the other solutions that we offer. So, of course, we offer standards, but we also offer a few other tools that hopefully you would find helpful. Many hydrophobic compounds are stored in organic solvents. A lot of what we analyze, whether it's residual solvents, whether it's pesticides, whether it's cannabinoids, are shipped in organics. Are you pipetting these reference materials correctly? I think most people use air displacement pipettes, and we know the error associated with those when pipetting things like methanol and acetonitrile. While I love positive displacement pipettes, there is a cost associated with the tips. One of the other things that we offer is gas tight syringes. And I will say I've had several customers who have prepared things like calibrators and QCs in gas tight syringes versus air displacement pipettes. And I'll say that the difference is quite surprising. You're going to get, just better overall data when you're using the appropriate, tools in the process. Also, some other things, I've worked in a few other spaces, and, one of the questions that I ask people when they have a little trouble, do you freeze your syringe? If we're worried about volatility, can you put that syringe in the freezer for 30 minutes before you actually need to use it? Does that help out with some of your analytes, things like carbonyls? That's kind of the way that you do it. Likewise, I think we should look down the hall to our friends in the biology, microbiology, molecular biology lab. I noticed that, as we started to get into PCR, when that was required, cold blocks were really a big thing in molecular biology, which we just don't really use typically a lot on the chemistry side of things. So we actually offer cold blocks as well. So that can help you out with keeping your samples, as temperature controlled as possible while you're trying to prepare them, because at the end of the day, we'd love for them to sit in the freezer. However, you've got to use them, right? So can we offer solutions that help you do that? So, we do offer a wide range of gas tight syringes and cooling racks. Likewise, some of the other things that we're looking at, what about single-use packaging of problematic analytes? We know that things are going to be difficult to deal with, especially once oxygen or light, things like that. So can we make it efficient for single-use packaging for some of your problematic analytes? So a couple of CPI products I just wanted to highlight over here, because I think we got some really good stuff that you may not know about. So of course we make state-specific pesticide and residual solvent mixes. If you check out our website, hopefully you will find your state, or you will find a comparable state. One of the products that I really want to highlight is our Arizona pesticide mix. We do a mixed concentration standard based on the tolerance limits that are allowed in Arizona. The other thing interesting about Arizona is they actually require that you have to run a QC at every action limit for every pesticide. So if you're using a single concentration standard, I believe it requires your QC, you would run 6 different QCs for that sample to meet that requirement. Our mixed concentration standard is a single dilution, and everybody would be at their action limit from there. So this will allow you to run 1 QC in your batch to cover that requirement of all analytes being QC'd at their action limit. Would love to, potentially look about that in other states. While it may not be required, I think it's a great practice to, see what a fail, see what the level of a fail looks like on a daily basis with your QC. Likewise, we also have multi-vial reference standards, things like the Oregon mix, where we're actually packaging some pesticides. I believe it comes in 6 separate vials. Some of that is due to stability. So, those of you with this, 55, 65 pesticide mix out of there, can we start to package those things separately to help out with your, help out with stability concerns? So, some of it is we're going to provide products, and others is, we want to work with you. So what's feedback on issues that you're having, and can we take care of that from a supplier type issue? I'd also like to point out a couple of future offerings or things that we've got in the works or we're thinking about. As I mentioned, propane, small aliquots. It's really frustrating that you'll open up a standard and propane seems to be the only one misbehaving. Do I believe that your method or your assay is incorrect? No, I believe that's probably a standard related issue, because propane is incredibly volatile. So can we offer that in a, more economical or more efficient packaging? Likewise, cannaflavins. I think when I started in the industry, it was what's my THC percentage? Then it slowly moved to what's my terpene profile? What's going to be that next frontier? Well, I think people are going to want to know more and more about their samples. And as we learn, things like cannaflavin A, cannaflavin B, some of the other cannaflavins that may be in there. I think people are going to be more and more interested in, identifying and quantitating those. So, we're working on getting availability for those cannaflavin standards as we start to determine what is present, and what types of standards that we would like to provide. So in summary, hopefully you guys got a really good, hopefully we really drove home the point. Reference standards are a critical part of your laboratory testing. Again, it's a junk in, junk out kind of situation. If you're trying to calibrate with bad materials, you're going to have bad calibrations. You're going to have inaccurate results. So it's very important, that you don't overlook the critical aspect of standards. And along those same lines, don't overlook stability. We provide those and we give you storage conditions. However, keep in mind that is what we have studied for the packaging, manufacturing, shipping side of things. Once you crack that open, your conditions are completely different. You need to make sure that you understand those. I also wanted to make sure that we highlighted CPI has a variety of reference standard offerings and other tools to hopefully help with some of your laboratory challenges. Again, what you're doing is difficult. How do we help you make your life a little easier? And at the end of the day, we want to work with you. We want to provide products, that help improve your laboratory. We want to provide solutions that make your life a little easier. It's no fun failing QCs. It's no fun chasing problems in this. So how do we take care of that on the upfront and hopefully partner with your laboratory to, help provide a good supply, a good source of reference materials?
All right.
So we'd like to thank you for your attendance. Hopefully you found this to be helpful. Hopefully this introduced some different products, different potential solutions. CPI is going to be here for your help. And likewise, I am also available. My contact info is listed there. If you'd like to chat further, a little bit more in depth about, stability testing or anything as far as the, cannabis analytical side of the industry.
Thanks, DJ. Appreciate your time and appreciate you joining up. And if anybody needs to get into contact with DJ to get more info or to hire him to work with you guys, feel free. His contact information's there. If you have any other questions about product supply or anything more detailed and you want to talk to CPI, please feel free to reach out. There's our contact information. We have people that will answer the phone and talk you through things. And if we don't have the answer right then, we'll get back to you on that. I just wanted to real quick, DJ, go through the polls. So it looks like we ran 2 polls. Do you run a calibration schedule? It looks like 71% said yes and 28% said no. So about 3/4 of you are running a calibration schedule. So I don't know if DJ, you want to comment on that at all, but I think that's probably in line with what we'd expect, right?
I think so. It's great to hear that all of you guys, significant majority do have that. I just, my philosophy with, running labs and having, the production expectations we do is it's better to plan for downtime than be surprised by it.
Okay. And then the other poll we ran was, what is your most challenging assay? And it looks like this one's more across the board, everybody. So cannabinoids actually 0%. So glad to hear that no one's having an issue with the cannabinoid testing. But pesticides about 33%, residual solvents about 33%, mycotoxins 22%, and terpenes 11%. So I don't know if that's what you expected, DJ, based on your experience, but it looks like it's across the board at some level.
I almost feel like that was probably about the QC fail. If we charted everything, about 1/3 going to pesticides, about 1/3 going to residual solvents, I would say, if, like I mentioned, if an analyst comes to me and says, hey, we had an analyte fail at QC, what do we want to do? My money's on we're walking over to the GC for residual solvents, or we're walking over to one of the triples for the pesticides. So I'm not entirely surprised. It's good to see nobody's really running into some of the cannabinoid issues. Hopefully, those were things of years past. I'm a little surprised more on the mycotoxin side and terpenes. There's a lot of interesting nuances with terpenes, but it's good to see that a lot of folks are, it seems to be in a pretty good spot with that.
Sounds good. So thanks for participating, everyone, in those polls. Now let's get to some questions here. Let me just pull up some notes. questions section. So DJ, it looks like we have a question here. How would you perform your stability or how do you perform your stability testing? For example, residual solvents and tracetine. The ampule can be stable, unopened for years. And so I'm not sure if JF, you're wondering from the your laboratory's perspective or from the CRM facility perspective. I can comment a little bit on that, and if we had some people from the lab in here, they could probably even comment more. But a 17034 lab is going to have a couple ways they're going to test stability. So they're going to test it over time. So they're going to package the product same way they send it to you, and they're going to test it periodically to see the response and make sure there's no degradation there. And so that's essentially how the shelf lives are determined from a CRM producer perspective. Initially, there are accelerated studies that can be done. So in a shorter amount of time, you can assign a shelf life. But over time, we can collect that data. And DJ, I don't know if you want to comment on how people might perform stability testing in their own lab of opened ampoules or things like that.
Yeah, and to me, our focus is really on the open ampules. How do we store it? Do we aliquot it? What's it doing over time? How long are those? How long are those aliquots good for? Was a lot of what we would focus in. And residual solvents is tough because it is so challenging. But my thought process with a lot of these is, you open it once. How do we create a situation where you are only exposing that to room temperature, oxygen, air, heat, and light? One additional time out of there. So I think a lot of it is you got to focus more on, the preparation side of things, and how you think that's going to, study how you expect that to change over time. And I'll say aliquots are certainly a good way to fractionate stuff to study those, because at the end of the day, you got to run samples to see what's going to happen.
Awesome, Jay. And Jay, if you have more questions about that, feel free to reach out to us, and we can go into more detail there with you. One other thing on the mind is, what's your recommendation, DJ, on reference material concentrations? So there's a lot of options out there. And so how does someone decide what levels they're going to purchase their reference materials at for the specific analytes?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things that I factor into that. What are the limits? Where do we need to be? What is your overall process? But another one is how you're going to use it. I've gotten the opportunity to work with a lot of different people, and some of that is going to be, I like a higher concentration standard when I'm actually trying to calculate things like recovery, extraction efficiency, things like that, where I'm actually spiking my standard in. I really like the high concentrations to try to be as economical as possible there. I don't want to buy something at 1 ppm and have to use 10 vials to get to the amount that I need to actually put into, live samples and actually extract out of there versus, calibrators and QCs. You may like lower concentrations out of there because, it may be, a price issue. It may be, it's easier to work with. Single dilution gets you down there. If you're, limits are in the ppb range and your standards at 1 ppm, it's very easy to, do a 10x type dilution to get to the concentrations you need, or maybe 100, versus when you're starting at 100 ppm, maybe it's a 1 to 100 dilution followed by a second 1 to 100 dilution, which, propagation of error and uncertainty might factor into those results. So I think you kind of look at what you're going to use that standard for. And I usually default to the highest concentration I can get when I'm actually doing extractions and studying that part of the method, versus I'm typically going to be a little bit lower concentrations to make my dilutions a little more practical, with hopefully less error when I'm thinking in terms of things that I'm using for calibrator, CCVs, ICVs, QCs, that type of material.
Okay, hopefully that provides some insight there. Another question: have you heard of purchasing issues, analytical standards from out-of-state sources? Thanks for your question, Matt. I can comment from a CPI perspective, I guess. So, we ship standards across the country and the world, and we don't run into a lot of issues. There are the controlled substance standards, cannabinoids and things like that. Those specifically go through a DEA approval process to be able to be shipped across the country. So they're exempt from some of these other laws at the federal level. I don't know, DJ, if you want to comment on that, or if you've seen any issues with.
I haven't seen any issues with the standards themselves, and I think it's really kind of isolated to just the cannabinoid standards. Is really what the feds don't like. The biggest, thing that I would suspect is I would love to, produce distillate that we could utilize as a matrix blank, or even a, characterized reference material to actually have a legitimate PT out of there. However, I don't think the DEA would like it if I shipped it across state lines. So I don't think it's so much in regards to issues of acquiring the standards. And think about most cannabinoid standards you're going to get a milligram out of it. So, just very small, um, you know, very low concentrations in there that you don't really run into the issues. The big thing is really, I would love to see more matrix based stuff, but it's just, that's really where we run into the legalities of, I would love to produce, like I said, I would love to produce characterized distillate that becomes into a PT or a matrix blank and things like that. But I think the feds would be really mad at me if I tried to pull something like that.
So maybe right now with what's offered, it's not really an issue, but it might be limiting some of the options that might be more ideal for people at this time, as far as matrix blanks or things along those lines. That's what it sounds like. One more here. How does this information apply to internal standards? What's your advice?
Great question. You never want to overlook the stability of internal standards, but at the same time, hopefully your internal standards are something that has pretty good stability that you can really count on being the robust aspect of your assay. I get this question a lot with just a lot of different industries in general. And here's my kind of philosophy. I love internal standards. That's your check to make sure that the instrument is working. That's a check to make sure your extraction process is working. However, it's really how accurate do you want to be? Take pesticides, for instance. If you want the most accurate results, I would say get an isotopically labeled internal standard for every single analyte that you produce. However, in the cost realm, once you factor in the business aspect of it, that's just not practical. So, my recommendation on pesticides is I love triphenyl phosphate. It's something that's cheap, it's fairly stable, it's pretty robust, it's easy to detect, and it fits in the chromatography of, pesticide analysis. While it's not, accounting for specific matrix effects, I would also argue this is difficult because think about the differences in flowers and the compounds. You've got some that are purple flowers, some that are dark green, some that are light green, different oil contents. You have a lot of variables that I think a lot of other industries just aren't used to. You don't see that same variability with blood testing, urine testing that I think you do with some of the different expression of chemicals in cannabis. So, again, I would love to say isotopically labeled internal standards for everything, extraction standards in there to monitor the extraction. However, you got to balance that practicality aspect of it. At the end of the day, you're doing something for money and we got to make money doing it. So, you've got to balance how accurate do you want to be. But again, don't forget to study that stability of that internal standard in the process, because I would argue if you're having stability issues with your internal standard, you might not have picked the right internal standard for the assay.
Gotcha. Okay. And then we also have a comment and question from our good friend Robert Thomas here, who's an expert in metals, and hopefully, Robert, we can maybe get you on to do a webinar too, because I know there's a lot of stuff going on here, and both from a matrix and from a consumption aspect, and what metals are in vapors or compared to gummies, compared to flour. So I know there's a lot of questions around that. Robert did make the clarification that, heavy metals, well, generally might be stable. They're, for example, mercury is notorious for not being stable, which is commonly one of the elements that is within a cannabis panel, a cannabis compliance lab panel. So, to the question, I'm trying to read through here, Robert, to get to the question. Finally, there are currently no cannabis heavy metal CRMs. NIST is working on one, but not available yet. So how do you suggest labs ensure their heavy metals data is accurate when no reference materials are available for the validation process? So
it's interesting that you bring that up, because a lot of people are validating, and I would love to put it in matrix. The problem is, take distillate, for instance. It's something I like to use. We could not find a true matrix blank distillate. Everything would always come up with, trace backgrounds in heavy metals, and that made that incredibly challenging. I think pesticides is a little bit easier to do. I can get my hands on pesticide-free materials a little bit easier than, from what we've seen, heavy metals. It's just, that's a very tough one with the background. I think you got to do the best you can. At the end of the day, a lot of people want accuracy, 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 and it's like there's only so much that we can do. If materials aren't available or it's not practical, you got to kind of work the best way you can, and that's really where things like second source verification comes in. You're checking something, cool, does another standards manufacturer get that same result? So at least you can say, hey, I've tested it, I've done the best that I could with this. But this is an industry that I think the first cannabis lab opened up in 2008. So in our country, it's something that's still really new. And that's one of the challenges of a new industry is, I'd also argue this with potency. We still haven't established what a 20% flower is. And certainly we don't have a way to check that. And likewise, that's just one of, hey, we're going to do the best we can, but we're not to that point in the industry. And I think heavy metals, you're kind of in that situation. You got to do the best you can, but there are some practical limitations with that. One of which being cannabis is a great accumulator, and it's going to absorb anything from the environment. If you're growing things in the soil, it's you're inevitably going to face challenges with heavy metals. So I just think that's one of the limitations of the industry right now is it is where it's at. Try to do the best you can with it, but knowing that, is it better for us to know, hey, there may be heavy metals, these levels may not be completely accurate, but we know that these things are there. Maybe that affects soil selection on the cultivator side or things like that. However, if we're not spot on accurate, I would just say that's a limitation of the industry at this point and what's available.
And I think there's probably a lot of questions around the heavy metal side, Robert. And, we certainly appreciate you joining here. If anybody doesn't know, Robert Thomas has written a practical guide for ICP-MS and also one specifically for the cannabis space. So he's an excellent resource as well for anybody looking for help in that area. And I know, Robert, you've been a big advocate for more standardization and more understanding within the metal space. So we appreciate you joining and appreciate your question. Hopefully we can bring more detail to that in maybe a future webinar. That'd be great. DJ,
and also on the same lines too, Robert also does a lot of good work in the aerosol space of starting to understand that. And I think that's really one, it's incredibly difficult testing, the variability of a lot of different inputs in that process. But I think it's good that we're starting to have those discussions because what we're doing in the lab is great. I love that we're getting to characterize products and things like that. But what's that next step? What's that second question? Well, what am I actually consuming out of there? So, certainly when I was, running an emissions testing lab, we were definitely looking at Robert's resources because I think he's, kind of one of the early promoters of testing, and I'm right there with you. I'm incredibly curious as a consumer to know, okay, that's great. We see some heavy metals in the oil. Am I actually consuming those? And if so, how are they getting there? And I think Robert's really leading the charge on better understanding that.
Thank you, DJ, for that. Another one here. How much do you think environmental impacts affect standards? So I think this might come down to storage conditions or how you're handling things is maybe what the question is here, DJ.
I think that can be, it can be quite impactful. For me, being in the desert, we were 10 to 20% humidity pretty consistently, and it was hot. And while our lab, was designed for probably what we started with, it didn't account for the growth. And there were days where we had to have temperature considerations. There were, ways that we had to store our reference materials as we used them because evaporation, and temperature were definitely a concern. I get to go in a lot of labs and I see a lot of different things. And I think, just one overall, and I think it's probably labs in general, is oftentimes I think we overlook the HVAC aspect of it. And if your lab's hot, it's not out of the question to say your organic solvents are evaporating. It's not out of the question to say, solvents and things like that are, being impacted by that. So I think it's, part of the internal evaluation that you do is that environment. And, a situation like us, it was a much more cost-effective way to change the way we did things than to redo the air. And I think a lot of people are going to be in that boat where I would love to, spend $20,000 to do the air the way that I would like to be. However, that's just not in the budget. So how do we work around that? And I think a lot of people are in that situation. So don't overlook that because that can be, potentially pretty impactful depending on where you're at.
Very, very good, DJ. Really appreciate your time, guys. I think we're going to wrap it up there. JF, I see you have another question. We'll be happy to respond to that via email. It looks pretty specific, but want to thank everyone for joining. Again, Daryl Johnson with CH Lab Consulting. Thank you very much. If you have more questions or would like to get into contact with DJ, there's his contact information. And again, he travels the country helping people set up methods, providing advice, and he's really a great resource and expert for you guys. So I would suggest if you have questions and need help and need to hire someone up to meet your goals, DJ's a great guy. Again, Robert Thomas is on this webinar as well as an attendee. Hopefully we can maybe set something up where we can talk a little bit more detail of the heavy metals, but he's also a great resource specifically with heavy metals and has a lot of experience in that area. So he's also a great resource for you. And again, CPI International, we're happy to answer your calls, answer your questions. You can always get into contact us on web chat on our website. You can email us. You can call us. We're always available. And again, we're on the West Coast. So if you're on Mountain Time, Central Time, or East Coast Time, we're generally available a little bit later in the day for you guys. We'd be happy to talk to you about what materials you need, and we're happy to stock those on our shelves to kind of decrease that supply chain variability and risk that all the labs are facing. So get in contact with us. We're happy to help you. We're planning on doing more webinars, specifically in the cannabis space. We know there's a lot of resources out there that we have access to, and we want to bring them to you guys and make sure you're getting the information you need in this blooming industry. And we appreciate everyone joining and appreciate your time. And we hope to hear from you. And we hope this was helpful. So I just want to say thank you for joining, and thank you, Daryl, for putting this together and being a resource for this community. That said, I think that concludes our webinar here, and look out for the future if this was helpful for additional ones.
Awesome. Thank you for your attendance, guys.